Welcome to House Rule, a podcast about role-playing. It is our 29th episode, and
more or less.
Ringing it in with me here today, I am one of your hosts, Ed, and we have...
Ebo.
This is Jeff.
I'm Lee.
And I'm Richard.
Yeah, alright, gang.
So if you listened to our last episode, I apologize for making it sound like shit. It'll sound better this time, I promise.
We'll see.
Okay, I promise maybe. I don't want to lead anyone
I'll
on.
hold you to
Lee
it.
will always sound like shit, but at least the audio quality's alright.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I'm going to start promising maybe more things.
Yeah.
A really good way to weasel out of something before you even neglect to do it.
I promise maybe to hang out with you guys more.
I promise maybe to be your friend forever. I promise maybe that just to start off this episode, we were going to talk a little bit about the subject of setting vis-a-vis tabletop-style role-playing games.
That, I think, is a valuable subject. Personally,
Absolutely. Pretty much every tabletop role-playing game has one.
Yes.
It's
Well,
kind of hard
pretty
to
much.
get out of the gate
Not GURPS.
without any. Yeah,
as far as
I
I'm
guess.
concerned, GURPS is just an amorphous mass where everyone has swords and laser guns and like cowboy spurs and tentacle
I
heads.
guess my point is less that every game comes packaged with one, and more that when you sit down at the table, there's bound to be a setting there.
That's true. Even if there's not an actual setting in the game, if your host is gracious enough, they will have given you a setting at the table.
Well, table settings
plates
are
and forks.
really... Yes,
Got it.
I was going to make some sort of Martha Stewart joke, but the point is, well, yeah, we have in our gaming group, at least in my gaming history, we have our general attitude towards settings seems to be like homegrown is the best way to go about it. You kind of conjure what you want. Well, you start a game when you have a setting that you want to. When you've made up a setting that you want to play.
That is true.
But more and more, as I've grown terminally old and busy with real life adult things, I've come to really respect and expect and admire role-playing games that come with a really detailed and interesting setting.
Yeah.
Like I know I had been running some Pathfinder material set in the published Pathfinder world of Galarion, which I've grown very attached to. It's
It's a good
pretty
setting.
much turns my crank. Yeah, it's kind of it's got some like shamelessly obvious things like the disposition of the continents on the world map are kind of obviously meant to mirror the continents on Earth in terms of their flavor, not necessarily their shape. They do there's some obvious flourishes like you can walk over the North Pole from the European / Middle Eastern region all the way to the Asian-inspired part of the world. The continent, which
That
I
actually
believe
sounds
is-
really awesome.
It's one of the coolest things. Like I was just looking through some, looking at some maps, and they have a super awesome North Pole map. Yeah, and the setting has got it's got a lot of stuff going on. Like obviously, the first adventure paths that were set there before Pathfinder was even its own role-playing game, when it was still just a 3.5 adventure path and setting. They kind of have this sort of region kind of earmarked for those, and then they just sort of, it's like they branch out kind of from there, in my opinion. Like individual modules will have like a little corner of the Earth of the Galarion, I should say, where they take place, and yeah, I mean, it goes,
Galarion, whatever.
well, I said the Earth, but I meant a different fantasy planet. but they like go on forever. Like you can go from that area to like a southern continent filled with jungles, and you could go to a sort of weird outbackish kind of Australia. And then you could go to another planet. They have a lot of information about the other planets.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Is there spell jamming?
Not explicitly that I've come across,
Oh,
but
there's gonna be.
I mean, I think they have a book, like a whole book set apart for the planets. I've just read the general descriptions of them in one of the
Oh my
earlier.
god, it never
I don't remember
ends.
if it's an adventure
Be
map.
called-
Yeah, they have like.
Galari space.
Well, and like I was saying, it's
Space Arion?
Well, I mean, Galarion is it the planet or well, whatever. It's they have like an equivalent of
Distant
Yes.
worlds.
Venus, Mars, Saturn, Pluto, what have you. So it's
Are
like
any of them like inhabited?
oh boy, hell yeah.
Nice.
There's crazy. Yeah, obviously derivative of John Carter of Mars, like 6-armed giants on Mars or the Mars equivalent planet.
Yeah, it's,
Venus is covered with elves and these weird aliens who are like elves with antennas, and they ride on giant jungle beasts and stuff.
it's
pretty
called
dope.
Pathfinder campaign setting Distant Worlds.
Oh,
There you go. They
that
also
sounds
have
awesome.
they also have planes, which are rather like the planes you'll get in D&D, although their cosmology is, it's set up in a unique way that is nonetheless inclusive of all of the realms you would need to support a host of demons, devils, daemons.
Thank you for that.
Well, I don't know how they intend for me to.
We're going to avoid saying that word for the rest of the podcast.
Well, yeah, I mean, hopefully for the rest of the time.
One thing I'd like to mention about Pathfinder and their expansive setting that seems interesting to me is that Pathfinder as a game, I guess, like we said in our previous podcast, up until recently, hasn't done a lot with like prestige classes and whatnot. So the game itself does not require such a specific setting. Like it's not integrated directly into the rules like it is in some settings, yet it still is just vast and all over the place and really cool.
It's a really dense setting, and I think the way they built it up is interesting because they did it like, via the adventure pass a lot of the time. So it's like you have these
Right.
adventure paths that take place in like a medium or smallish sized area, and everything in there is like really dense, and there's a lot of stuff, and it makes the world like, when I look at it or when I read about it, it makes it seem really like lived in because there's just crap everywhere. Like you go to a section and there's all this stuff there, because they already had a level 1 to 30 campaign there. It's awesome.
I was just remembering something, and I could be wrong about it, but isn't there like an area of that planet in the Pathfinder setting that is kind of like the unexplored area per se?
Right,
Like
yeah. They have a continent that I can't remember what it's called. I can't remember what any of the continents are called. It's
I don't know.
like it's basically like the New World. They have basically way to the west of the core setting. There's a whole other continent that is supposed to be like really wild and dangerous and unexplored. And I think they even give it something of a supernatural cast in some of the places where they talk about it.
the reason it's so interesting that they have something like that is because it allows people to branch into something that they've never written about, as far as like authentic Pathfinder material.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it gives you the opportunity to go do something that isn't set in stone. And it dawned on me when I had read something about this that, like back in the day, the first time I ever played D&D was actually a campaign set in the Dragonlance world.
Mhm.
And if anybody read the books, they pretty much all took place on one continent. But they never talked about any other part of the world ever. And it just kind of dawned on me, like all at once, that that's probably what the point was, is that as they released that as a setting, that people could stay on that planet, keep all of the existing cultures or whatever, but, you know, explore across the sea to a place that nobody has written about, so that they could, you know, have free reign and you know, create whatever they want.
Yeah, and I think that
Also,
that's sort of true of a lot of D&D settings. Like I know Forgotten Realms has just a lot of they do have a lot of well, they've kind of exhaustively published material about some of the
Yeah,
regions.
Forgotten Realms was very well fleshed out.
They basically renew it every time the system updates, but a lot of those setting elements have more or less never been republished since they originated. I've never been like too much of a a Realms head, but I am aware that it has just got like nooks and crannies in that world that go on and on and on.
is there much benefit to going the other way, where you start out in your own world, and then you branch out to, say, Galarian? Maybe you find out that you started on one of the unknown continents in it.
I feel like that'd be interesting for people if the players knew about Galarian. Um, like it would be interesting because they'd be like, "Oh, I know this stuff. Oh my God, I can't believe that's where we were the whole time." You know, like I think that'd be pretty cool.
Oh yeah, you'd have Ed sitting in the corner. He's like, this NPC. There's something about him. Up, he's an Aldori Sword Lord. I know it. That's it.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you had people who had no idea about Galarian, and then you moved in, you moved the campaign in that direction, or they moved themselves in that direction, and they ended up there, it would just seem like more campaign. And I think, like, if you're moving into an established campaign setting from something that's uniquely your own, like, the people who know a lot about it, I think it would be like an interesting trip for them, like they'd be like the guys who are like, oh, I know where we are, oh, this is so cool, I can't believe that. And that'd be fun. But like, yeah, if you had people who had no idea, it would be basically the same thing as if you were using your own setting.
I don't think they'd get it.
Yeah.
I guess what do you I'm wondering, like we've talked a decent amount about like published settings or settings that come with like setting material maps and whatnot, but like in even in regard to like a more setting light kind of maybe more contemporary game, like we've played a lot of Mage the Awakening, which is obviously set in the modern world, but it has elements of setting that it comes with, namely like societies and history and other factions and factors.
Mhm.
What like I don't know. What is your opinion of like settings where it's not really like setting it in a place, but more like setting up world elements like that?
I guess I really feel like purpose is the huge driving force there. If you take like a setting like pretty much all the D&D games, Pathfinder and all that, your character's the same. In any of those games, you're this class or whatever, so it gives you this real sense of I can go anywhere and do anything, and the world is mine to explore, to adventure, and that's the feel that you get, and that's the feel you want for a game like that. Whereas in like World of Darkness, you've got like, hey, the abyss is here. That is tied into how I interact with my own character every day, and I
Yeah.
think that gives it a
Sure.
very different feel. And I don't know. I think that's very important for games like World of Darkness, and it depends on what kind of game you want to run, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of setting stuff that just sort of influences your character in the World of Darkness games. Like you said, like the Abyss is a like uniquely mage thing, and it's a problem that every mage has to deal with. So unless you're mucking with the rules for a while, that bit of setting is going to be with you no matter where you set the game,
It's,
and no matter how you play the game, really.
it's like you more or less know what Earth is, so the setting in those games they're there to tell you how it's different and why that matters to you, I guess.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that does also seem fairly compelling to me. I've never seen in a World of Darkness book them like map out, well, here's the big supernatural headquarters here in this country, in this city, and
Well, it's funny
Well,
you
okay.
should say that because been, I've recently been reading a lot of material about Mage the Ascension in the old World of Darkness, and they really, really do that. They did that a lot in the old World of Darkness. Like, I mean, there are, you know, there are a lot of like factions and characters and other things listed in Awakening materials, but in the Ascension books, it's like I feel like they're going a little farther to establish the setting for you by filling the world with characters, filling the world and universe with places, and enumerating their purposes quite plainly. Like there is a big supernatural headquarters in Mage the Ascension. It exists. Like there's like a mage base. I mean, it's not exactly viewed that way in the setting, but it's like I feel like the difference isn't so much that it's not so much that the settings of the new mage and old mage are that different. It's that the old mage told you how things were and left it up to you to, of course, always exercise that golden rule of if I don't like it, I throw it away. Whereas the new mage, I feel like they're probably / possibly to avoid any appearance of falling into the old metaplot habit. They've taken a care to almost be like sterile with the setting.
Well,
Like they tell you what the orders are, but it's like they don't tell you like. I think it's just kind of like a lot localer setting. Like you're intended to cast the leadership in the different orders and factions in your game, because unlike Ascension, they don't have like a grand poobah who's ruling the entire roost from some magical fortress in the spirit world.
Well,
So,
I think it's brilliant personally because they don't fall in they don't like get into these pitfalls where they start associating like say a country or a city with something good or something bad, and they give the player a lot more free reign. But at the same time, what's interesting about it is that you kind of like you kind of have Earth as it is in your head. You already know where everything is, so they didn't have to design it. They were able to skip out on that design part. Whereas somebody that was designing something for Forgotten Realms or for like a Pathfinder setting, they had to like come up with a whole culture about every city and the NPCs and whatever subplot is going on or whatever. But in Mage, since it's assumed to be most of the time in a modern day setting, you can basically just go to Google Maps, which we've done, and like, oh, I feel like we should go to that Mexican restaurant down the street, and there's like the setting is there. It's real life. You just pick what you want to go do with it, and you can spend more time on creating the personalities.
I've spent a lot more time, now that you mention it, like in preparing Mage the Awakening games, researching real world stuff than I would have ever expected. Just because like I want to get a certain feel for the setting, and it turns out that I don't know anything about any major world cities. And I want to set it in a place where there's people because, well, that's just what I wanted to do. I think you could run a perfectly serviceable, like super rural mage game, but what I wanted to do is
I
a
want to
place
see
where there's
that.
Mage the Farming.
Well, I mainly mean like your mage and his
I
mentor.
just pick up
have a
these
cabin.
haystacks right here and I just teleport them.
Sure. Oh boy.
Okay.
I think
Actually, commenting on what you're talking about,
Yeah.
I feel like the newer World of Darkness games, they say, well, it maybe could be like this. Here are the tools, you decide, and it lends
Sure.
itself more to like getting you in the mindset to be creative with the real world as you look at it, unless here's canon material, please use it or don't, whatever.
So
Well,
Later.
what are
like
the beginning? What are the books for the city books for Mage? Because there's like the Boston one
Boston
for Mage, and I
Unveiled
think there's
and
like
Chicago
Chicago
is vampire,
Vampire.
werewolf, and mage combined set.
So what do those not do that the old World of Darkness ones
You
do?
know, this is something that I just was thinking as we were talking about the setting material in the Mage the Ascension books that I've read, is that it talks so frankly and directly about the people and places and scenery and facilities in all of these places that aren't on Earth. And it does not talk very much about the places that are on Earth. And it sort of gives you this feeling. This is something that I wasn't familiar with due to admittedly playing the game more or less wrong before. It gives you this feeling that the game isn't really even set on Earth, even though it really is, because they will mention offhand like this chantry has a location in this city, and also this fantastical realm that's attached to it that you can get to through such and such portal. And so it's like it kind of gives you a free reign over the earthbound stuff. At least in my experience, I would be willing to wager that there are probably some books that talk at length about the stuff I'm saying are absent. But it's like where are these characters supposed to be? I can't picture them walking on the street. I'm just picturing them drifting through some sort of starscape with all sorts of weird, freaky alien monsters, and it just
Can you run that game? Because I love Starscapes with freaky aliens.
don't tempt me. Um, but yeah, like they describe all of these horizon realms and spirit world locales, and it's like they don't say like, yeah, and there's a group of mages who lives in St. Louis, Missouri, and they do this. It's just like it seems like, yeah, I guess my immediate impression with Mage the Awakening was just that like the idea of the setting was supposed to be a little bit more local, like your little corner of the world and what's going on there. Whereas Mage the Ascension is really supposed to be like jet setting characters flying here and there and teleporting
Okay.
and going into the spirit world on journeys.
I'm
And
guessing what Ebo mentioned is very relevant, though. The newer World of Darkness books look to be more trying to be source, like core-ish source
right,
books. And I bet if you grab those newer, like city books, like he was mentioning, you can
hmm
go as deep into the rabbit hole as you care to.
yeah, I mean
Well,
I
that was the thing because
yeah
Demon the Descent is coming out with the Seattle source book, which is why I was wondering about it. And apparently, you get it for free if you pledge enough. Or actually, I think they met their goal to give it to people or something. But I was just kind of curious because that one seemed like it was more located in something really crazy is happening in Seattle.
sure, and that's like they have done that with some of the other ones too. Like I know that I don't know if they had a separate book for it, but I know that the default setting for Changeling the Lost was supposed to be Miami, and I think somewhere in that setting they gave a specific reasoning for that, which is that like changelings will, upon escaping their imprisonment with the fairies, they will wind up in certain places more than others, and Miami is, I guess, one of the just very lovinest places in the
Happens
world.
to be Miami. Okay.
Yeah, it just happens to be a popular place to spit out freed changelings.
They don't go home.
And
No, I mean maybe their home was Miami. Maybe all the changelings come from Miami and then they go back to it.
and like I mean, I think that the New World of Darkness, each of the game's systems has kind of a setting, like a city mainly. I know that Werewolf doesn't really have a city in particular. It just has like the Rockies as their default setting. But each of them has kind of a tie, like a tie that binds the game there. Like Mage is set in Boston. Boston had yeah, well, very adjacent to Boston had those Salem witch trials. Had a lot of
That's weird that came back up today.
occultism. I think Vampire's default setting is New Orleans, which, if for nothing, no other reason than Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire was set there, or at least for part of it.
Also,
It's a very
vampires don't have to breathe underwater.
It's a very no, that's not cool.
It's been many years. I don't
not
think
cool.
it's too soon.
I think Hunter's default setting is Philadelphia, which has kind of got that like revolutionary freedom fighter sort of vibe, like the little guy standing up to the big guy, and
Well, you know a lot more of these than I do.
yeah, I'm pretty impressed with myself actually. I didn't think I would have remembered somebody. If
You see-
Promethean has one, I couldn't tell you what it is, but maybe is it Detroit? Maybe
That would not be. That would
don't
make a little
remember.
bit of sense.
I don't remember.
You see, when I look at the at those books, I don't even notice the setting.
It's actually really subtle.
Yeah, I tend to get out of it like the feeling that they're going for, like the what they're trying to tell you about the way the characters interact with things, and like these are the problems the characters tend to deal with. These are the crazy shit that the characters can do, and that sort of thing. And it's like I tend to just sort of imagine that happening in like a nameless sort of place until somebody gives me like a place to put it in. Like
Guidelines.
Jeff said he was running a mage game in Detroit, and then I was like, oh yeah, because I know these things about the tone of a mage game, and I can think about how that would sort of plug into Detroit.
And I don't know exactly how much like research or anything that Jeff did with that, but I felt like once we got our hands on it, we were really kind of, as a group, into just kind of looking at what is actually there and how it would affect the game, and like locales and
Oh yeah.
Google mapping things and finding news stories about it. And
We started reading like news clippings and
Sure.
watching segments from their local news and stuff.
Dude,
I
that
mean,
guy is awesome.
They
Yeah,
are
he is.
messed up, oh, man.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff that goes on there, and actually, it's very interesting because I think that well, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I actually kind of feel like it's kind of sad that a lot of the country doesn't know what's actually going on over there,
yeah,
and you could learn a lot about it because it's kind of like we got to witness the decline of a metropolis, basically, like on a big scale. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But normally, I mean, I can't imagine anybody that I know that wasn't involved in that game or isn't from Detroit knows like the scale of problems that they have over there.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's like a setting that already exists. Like Jeff didn't even have to. I mean, I'm
You
sure
didn't even have to
wrote
make it
things.
dark.
I'm sure he wrote things about it, but like as far as like the World of Darkness goes, like they have this intent. Like things are dark, things are sad for a lot of the people there. They're sort of downtrodden. Like every supernatural is out to control humanity, and that and like that sort of taints the way the whole world works, and that's why they call it the World of Darkness, I assume, because it's dark for humans and dark for everybody else by proxy. But it's like in Detroit, when we were looking at it, it was startling how that was already built in. Like so much of that like modern decline has already happened, and it was like it was this rich setting that's already there, and it sort of made me curious about like how many other cities. I mean, I bet every city, like major city in the world, could have interesting setting just built in just by reading about it on the internet and sort of steeping yourself in this culture that they have built up there. maybe not every city. Minneapolis is not a super interesting city on that sort of scale,
No.
probably.
Jeff, how did you pick Detroit anyways? Was it like a dice roll, or did you have something that you saw and you were like, oh, that'd be perfect, or what?
What? Oh, no, it was just kind of a rundown city, and then I looked it up and I was like, oh, wow, this does not stop.
That rabbit hole keeps on going.
Yeah.
It seems like a fictional setting, like when you read about it, it's like
It does. It's almost hard to believe for like modern day, like children growing up right now in whatever city that's not Detroit. Like they would probably not even believe it is as bad as it is in some place that is not that far away.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a third world country. It's not, I don't know. It's not some time in history like where Rome fell or something. You know what I mean? It's like it's now. It's happening right now. You know,
it's like, and it's a setting that's already there. And it's like one of the things that makes World of Darkness interesting to me is that you can take all of this cool stuff that they have, all of this interesting, tone and feeling and that sort of thing that they sort of steep into the system and into the way everything is built, and you can plug that into any city or any place on Earth really, and you could like, with the tools we have now, you can like take a virtual tour of that place, and you can you can spend time there just by reading about it a lot.
you can
and you
see
have a
the
setting
junk
that's already
littered in their
there.
front yard.
Yeah, exactly. Like Ed ran a game in Paris, and like it was brief, but
I did a
like-
lot of reading for that game.
and I did a bunch of reading about that too, and
Paris before I started running that game.
What-
Um,
that place is kind of fascinating, and I would never have known.
absolutely.
And it's a setting that's already there, and there's there's so much cool stuff there. It's just it's wild.
In addition to cool stuff, I think one thing World of Darkness tries to go for, you mentioned tone, is sort of a horror type of atmosphere, and everything being fairly familiar, but then it's different in these few ways helps like bring that tone home, I think.
Yeah.
Sure. And I think the new World of Darkness games, more than having like a setting, I feel like they kind of go for like a setting toolbox approach, where it's sort of like there are some inherent conceits in each game about like what groups exist and what their general agendas are, and what sort of characters might exist in those groups. And you can like like we said, there a lot of these games have a book or a section in the core book about their ad default setting, some characters, some politics groundwork if you want that to be a big part of your game. But you can just as easily like take those components and assemble them in another place, and it's just like maybe I want this this faction tends to be ambitious. I want them to be on top. Or maybe you want to turn it on its head, like this is a place that's run in a completely different way by a different group, and how is the whole setting different because of the way basically the chips land.
Yeah.
It basically gives you the option of an established setting, or else it gives you a bunch of tools and no real excuse not to. Just do whatever you want.
Yeah. And now, like Pathfinder and World of Darkness both have like a lot of they have a lot of setting stuff, but then they also have a lot of like freedom in the setting or in the books in the system to sort of mess around with it. Like there are games that don't have as much freedom, like
How about Star Wars?
Shadowrun?
Let's talk about Star Wars.
Star Wars, or like I was reading about Mouse Guard, which has a lot of setting baked into it, and same with the one that it's based on, Burning Wheel.
But Mouse Guard is more of a setting-based book, though, right?
Yeah, and it's like, how do you feel about games where the setting and the system are like linked like that, where they're like they're difficult to separate.
I guess, um, like, I guess an example from our not too distant future that I was thinking about as we were talking was Eclipse
Yes.
Phase. Really has it has a lot of mechanical elements that are intrinsic in the setting, like swapping your mind to a distant body, things just like the pervasive surveillance is both a setting factor and a feature of the system, where there's a lot of technical things you can do where like a Shadowrun hacker would have to I don't know how the systems have changed it, but either jack in or find a secluded place to do their work. Whereas in Eclipse Phase, you can do like magic stuff with just the technology that everybody has in their brain.
Yeah.
You can be like observing people in other rooms, getting information from distant places, maybe software to increase your skills. Um, you can be doing all of these things. Um, just
Simultaneously.
yeah, and it's just like it's it's sort of got that it's got that kind of like the World of Darkness, where it's clearly based on something real, a real place, i.e., the solar system that we live in. But it does take certain liberties, like, well, obviously, with the passage of centuries, what is different in the future? A lot of times they describe that, a lot of places they leave it up to you. I mean, you could just as easily say, like, redefine any factors about, like, any of the cities on Mars or Titan, or else you can just, like, there's a nearly practically infinite number of asteroids that you could populate with cities or factories or some sort of creepy alien nanocloud that kills everything. And you can go
Aliens.
you can go through gates to truly alien settings. There's it's like the massaging of the real world setting that the World of Darkness uses, only it's on amphetamines, and then you let it sit for like 100 years and see what develops.
I also feel like as far as Eclipse Phase is concerned, like the after going through the character creation and reading a lot of like a surprisingly large amount of the book, um, and going through all of that, like I feel like the system really reinforces the setting. Um, like looking at how the game is played, and like the way you use the actual stats on your character sheet, and the way you approach that sort of thing, like it really like reinforces the way the world works, or the universe works, I guess, or the solar system or what have you. But like that game, more than any other that I can think of, uh, like the rules are like you know, crunchy and fluffy at the same time, and they really reinforce that there is this stuff and that there's all this extra space, and for you to be creative in. And I think that it sort of strikes a unique balance that I don't remember feeling that way when I read any other books, like role playing books specifically.
Well, I really like game systems that support what the game is about, and at the risk of making an overly broad statement, I think Eclipse Phase really is kind of about the setting. Not that it isn't about the characters, but it's like it is impossible for a person living in our time not to be almost obsessed while looking at, playing, or thinking about that game with the ways that society is different in that game than it is now, and the consequences of what we are doing now on how those things will become that way. Like like the saturation of social media and whatnot, is blown completely out of proportion. People are basically living their lives on networks of people connected via computers.
Yeah,
The
on like
way,
different planets and shit.
the way we've gotten used to certain levels of surveillance for security reasons mainly, it stops being strictly for security in the future of Eclipse Phase, and it starts just becoming a fact of life. That you're usually being watched, your activity can always be traced. Anything that you do, you better be comfortable with people knowing about it because there's very little way to hide those things.
Yeah.
I have to.
Yeah.
Good.
No, I was just gonna just launch into something else, but you can go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I have to admit, is like to add to the Eclipse Phase topic, it's probably one of the most challenging settings to get into because they like stripped away like everything that you're used to as far as like morals or like how society is entirely. I mean,
Gender identity.
yeah, I mean everything. I mean it's so hard to like really get outside of the box so far and then wrap your head around something that you've never even considered. You know, like if you're
Yeah.
an uplifted animal, you know what I mean? Like what how do you even get in that mindset that I used to be a cat? You know what I mean? And now I have the intelligence of a human. And when you think like even when you go to like Pathfinder or, you know, a Forgotten Realms or something like that, it's at least a fantasy society likely that you've read about. You understand if it's like a monarchy or whatever, you understand how that works,
Yeah.
the way that the people operate, you know what I mean? It's something you've heard about, you've read about, whatever, but this
Orcs
is
aren't
just
that different than humans.
yeah, exactly. It's weird because they aren't. But when you think about how different you have to be in Eclipse Phase to fit in, really, I guess.
Eclipse Phase really challenges what it is, like what human identity is, and I think that that's one of the most compelling character things, is that it's super hard to get into that.
I would say that, like in a D&D or something, you can play a character who is very non-human. You can play like a dragonborn or some sort of. You could play like, I don't know, any number of creatures that isn't at all like we think of humans. But I think the big difference that the Eclipse Phase setting really delivers there is that it kind of forces you to think about it in the context of your actual life experience. Whereas in D&D, you're taking it to another place. Yeah, orcs aren't that different from humans, but maybe they are. Maybe they're really different. But really, what does it matter? You're basically saying somewhere in a fictional land, centuries ago, certain characteristics developed in these humanoids, and they eventually became orcs. Whereas in Eclipse Phase, you're saying sometime in our not too distant future, computer programs will get the ability to gain sentience, and what do you think those people look like? Or how do you think it would affect your personality if you could change your body? Do you think you would do it? Do you think you would think that you were dead and you are now a ghost because your old body is dead?
Well, the challenge with Eclipse Phase to me is even more so the setting than just your actual how your character would react. Because see, like if you played as like say a mythical creature or whatever in D&D, and then you had to put yourself in the mindset, that's one thing. But society is very likely going to be the same way that a lot of society had already been imagined to be in D&D. But it is so warped out of what we know or what we've ever experienced in reality. In Eclipse Phase, it's so like out of proportion and just all over the place. That's the thing that's so hard to wrap your head around, because it's like you no longer are man or woman or who gives a shit, and you're just kind of floating along doing anything you want. You don't have to worry about the same kind of problems that we have, like you can die and then like be reanimated in a new body with a new everything. I mean, it's weird, it's just
it's very
even that
very weird.
They take the punch out of dying. They take the punch out of like physical violence, and they put and whereas I feel like the World of Darkness games want for there to be this element of terror or creeping madness that comes over you. I think that Eclipse Phase has it built into the system and also delivers it more readily to the player by way of communicating what is happening to you through the system. That, like the risks you run of just losing your mind in a world where like you can lose continuity with your life, because really like in gameplay mechanics, you die, you get a backup brought to life, and you continue to play this character. But in that character's experience, you are waking up from having had an appointment at a clinic, and they're telling you that you died, and the burden is on you to then figure out how or not.
Well, see, and when you take away the threat of death like that, then other things become the problems. Like
Sure.
Like identity.
stronger philosophical. Yeah, you can't lose your identity. You know what I mean? Or you can't.
Maybe you can.
Well, exactly. Or did you? You know what I mean? And it's like every game that you would play could just basically end up being a mystery because someone else could be pulling those strings or whatever. So even if you think you're doing what you think you would do, you're probably not even you anymore or whatever. I mean, it's all, and that's a possibility. Whereas like in Pathfinder or D&D, it doesn't ever feel like it gets that deep. I don't know. It's a challenging game to wrap your head around.
I had considered, like, when I was first getting acquainted with Eclipse Phase, I had considered the question of, like, how do you permanently kill an adversary? And, I mean, you can come up with a lot of ideas, like, for, Ocean's 11 capers, where you break into a backup facility and try to, like, delete all record of this person. But I think the main point I eventually came onto, and this kind of applies more to player characters than NPCs, but the basic thrust of it is that permanently dying is not the worst thing that can happen to you in the Eclipse Phase setting.
No.
And I think that is that delivers the terror in a more poignant way than I think the World of Darkness does by default. When you're thinking like, what would stink if my enemy, instead of like you get brought back to life in some sort of backup facility, you don't know for sure that the last version of you is dead. Maybe your adversary or assassin cut your brainstem out and brought you back to life in a computer somewhere so that they could torture you for all of your secrets.
Yeah, what if you're stuck on like an SD card for the rest of eternity?
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like maybe they're going to put you into some sort of infomorph slavery, or maybe they're going to they could do a lot of different things to your ego, and you might never know about it, but maybe one day you find out. Maybe one day you meet a guy who reminds you a lot of you. He has a lot of shared background. But for like an extra half decade of psychic torture, you're basically the same guy. You woke up one day in a clinic, went about your business, had some fun. This guy is just like you, except he's the what would have happened version if everything had been awful. And yeah, maybe he hates you. I think I would if I was there. I think
I'm glad you know that about yourself.
Well, no, I mean I think that you can also try to reemerge with a fork of yourself. So maybe you can try to integrate that shattered.
And that's all.
creatures all
Part of the setting is like
But I wouldn't.
The setting can be wielded like a hammer against your character. Like,
And I mean,
like the GM can go in and mess with you, mess with your character on such a fundamental level, or you can go and mess with your character on such a fundamental level, and it's all plugged in already into the
and
setting.
all of that fear and anxiety and unpleasantness is before you even get to the fact that the setting also includes dragonfly robots that saw your head off.
Just want to jump in here with the dumb guy perspective a little. I get this like really bad with like Eclipse Phase, also Amber Diceless, is the idea that I'm gonna miss so many little things like nuances and other shit like that I'm just not gonna understand as a player. And it's like, do you think a setting can be too overbearing to the point where it just gets in the way?
Well,
Um, I think
I
it depends on how much you invest in it.
It might have a
Like,
lot to do with the DM too, because it's going to be up to them to convey what you are perceiving or whatnot. So um, I don't know. It
Yeah,
does seem like it's a very complex setting to
I'd
where
say
you can miss a lot.
Eclipse Phase is one of those games that but for having heard that it is good a lot from different people, and um, the fact that you can get all of the books for free, I don't think I would have. Like I have had it for so long compared to how recently I started really reading about it, because it is a staggeringly high info dump
Well,
when
it's
you
like,
start trying to learn the setting of Eclipse Phase, because there's so much stuff you have to understand to even put your foot in the door.
well, it's like the basic question where the GM might ask you, "Well, what is your character doing right now? It's noon." I'd be like, I don't know, online carjacking? I don't get it."
Yeah, you
it's
know,
like, do you think to go in a similar direction? Do you think you could enjoy the Star Wars game as a person who has maybe never seen Star Wars or has only heard about it?
hmm,
Like, how much do you think you would have to invest into Star Wars to be able to enjoy a role-playing game? Like, do you think that's comparable? Like, watching 6 movies um, compared to reading some Eclipse Phase stuff?
well,
Like, I don't think Star Wars would have nearly as much punch if I didn't already know a bunch about Star Wars.
regardless of which system you're talking about in terms of Star Wars role-playing games, I really think. Okay, what I'm trying to say here, and I don't want this to sound like a crack, like a serious jab against Star Wars role playing games, but I really think that if you were playing a Star Wars role playing game and you were not familiar with the setting, you would be asking yourself the question, why aren't these rules better? Like, it's not. I think that shoehorning. That's really a case of shoehorning a setting into a game over and over again. I think some of them did it a little better. I We had some fun with the second D20 Star Wars game.
That is true.
yes.
Frankly, we had some fun with West End Games D6 Star Wars game, but that was back in the day when that was what it was for Star Wars role playing.
You mean that's
Um,
what there was?
It was a Star Wars game.
Yeah.
You know,
The
the only
thing
one.
though is that Star Wars is based on like an already established franchise. So that's the difference.
Yeah.
If you don't know anything about Star Wars and you're playing a Star Wars game, what you really should be asking yourself is, why am I playing this game? Because
And that's
it's
the thing.
obviously for fans.
That's the point I'm trying to make, is that there are some really neat things in that setting that if you're completely new to them, you're still gonna really like them. You're gonna
Okay.
like lightsabers and spaceship battles
Combat.
and Ewoks, maybe. But
Yes.
my point is that if you are, I feel like, yes, those games, and this is not supposed to be a dig against any past, present, or future Star Wars role playing games, but I'm just like, why don't you, if you want to play a role playing game that badly, if you're playing a Star Wars role playing game and you're not familiar with Star Wars, it's obviously because the person running it really likes Star Wars. But in this hypothetical world where nobody cares about Star Wars and you play the game anyway, you might as well just pick a game that you want to play and hope that they make a movie about it later. Because I think that it is for fans. They're trying to include everything from an existing setting into a game, which is an angle that I guess we haven't really talked about yet, but that is more
There's
or
a
less
bunch
the
of
best
angles we haven't
example.
talked about. There's also the Fate angle where you have a completely blank slate.
Well, Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
we
I
have
actually kind of thought we were going to go
A
that
whole
way
other
since
thing.
we've done a lot of Fate-style things, including the Mage game, but we've also covered a lot extensively on Fate, too,
Yeah.
so I think
Yeah.
most everybody knows how we feel
I think
about
the
it.
established setting stuff is
One-
interesting. I mean, it's interesting to me
Sure.
because when I come up with a setting, like when I come up with a game, I usually come up with the setting first. Like I come
Or
up,
you have the idea for the setting first.
I typically have the idea for the setting before I have the idea for the story. Um, like I'll come up with an interesting setting or a setting that I think is interesting, and then I'll try to like I'll think about like a story in that setting. Um, and I like that's what I did with the Fate game more or less. I mean, we came up with the setting, and I came up with a story for it. But it's like that's how I approach um, that sort of thing. So like, and now that we've been working inside of established settings more and more, um, I think that those are particularly interesting to me because it's so different than what I than the way I do things personally. So it's like like Eclipse Face is really interesting to me as a setting and also as a system. And I don't know, it's just like I in a certain way I could see myself running that sort of game, but at the same time I'm not even sure that my brain would allow that to happen.
Yeah, well, we haven't really talked that much in this episode so far about, the way we have done it traditionally, i.e., making up your own setting
Mhm.
and then deciding to run a game. Um, and maybe we haven't done well, like you said with the Fate game. That's kind of like we used a little bit of the collaborative setting creation. It was more like we had a genre slash setting mission statement, and then we decided as a group what does that mean really.
Yeah.
But like that's kind of just been the way of it for as far back as I can remember is like the secrets of the setting are known usually only to the GM, and we kind of unravel them as we play. And a lot of times that in a made up setting will involve getting like to the heart of it, like what the setting is about. Oftentimes, saving that world or defeating that world's devil, something like that.
Jeff,
Hmm.
we fought some devils in your game, like literally.
And I know that like Jeff has just started a game which is in kind of two categories at once. There, it's like it's an original setting, but it does have it's sort of like a lot of homage to existing setting. I'm not really sure how to classify that.
Oh, yeah. I more or less call it a Forgotten Realms reboot plus whatever the hell else it ends up being.
Well, yeah, it just seems like you basically just wanted to, I don't know, have room for everything that is good about the Forgotten Realms, but without having to read all of the books and memorize all of the factoids.
I actually really
You
like
don't have to
reading Realms
know
books.
Elminster stats.
What's that?
I like reading Realms books. I just did not want to ever feel bogged down by like
Like,
canon material
are
or
you talking about like literature or like source books, or both?
probably more literature than source books, but
And that's kind of what I'm saying. It's like you can get some ideas from like novels, but in terms of running a game, if you're not running the game that the novel is about, then you're kind of a slave to source books if you want to stay in that world. And like I think that's a perfectly good way of running any existing setting. Like even to a lesser degree, where you just say, "Hey, if you ever read any of these books, just don't go assuming that anything's there because any given town might be surreptitiously wiped off of the map if you go looking for it."
You like what NPC? Yeah, that guy got burned to a crisp by a dragon like yesterday, so it's gonna be difficult for you.
And his panther.
And his panther.
No.
I don't know. I guess one thing that I just like to comment somewhat related about like settings with like I guess called like canon characters and whatnot. Like unless it's done like really well, I feel like that is a lot more prone to like I don't know, like fanfic type stuff. Like you want the game to be about the characters, and if there's all these powerful NPCs like Elementor that everyone knows running around, like it's cool to interact with them, I guess, but maybe that's gonna kind of suck. Like I don't know, it's hard to
It
say.
depends, I think, on how big of fans your players are of that series or whatever too.
Yeah.
You know, because some of them might be hoping that they run into a character because that would really make the game. You know, like whatever big war is going on and you guys are just right there alongside everybody else doing your part, you know, that was never written about. And that can be kind of neat too. You know, but again, you have to feel out the players before you can go and
Yeah, I think you really want to know how your players are going to react when you insert a cameo like that, um, or when you have them interact with somebody like that.
Well, I'm just gonna have to give Rory mad props in that department because I have always felt like that would be really shitty, and he has done a really good job with his Amber game. Like when I interact with those NPCs, he is just like steel balls, plays them how he wants, and that's it. Fuck it, you
Yep.
know. Like really, it's really well done. So it can
Yeah,
definitely work.
Yeah, and there's a lot of wiggle room in the Amber with the Amber characters too because they're also uh, weirdly biased and the stories are all told from such a strange
yeah.
perspective.
Without
Um,
without going on too much of a tangent about the Amber setting, because it is really a noteworthy setting worthy of mention. In that it is, in addition to being a neat setting, it's also every setting and kind of no setting whatsoever.
Yeah.
But I would say, yeah, like in that setting, I feel like um, the characters really are the setting, and that includes even just one of the player characters by himself. Because, obviously you can make some statements about what you are doing and where you are going, and they become true. But then also, it's like the only touchstones in the Amber universe that are real are other characters. Like at any given time, you can be anywhere doing anything, or you could be like descending into chaos. But those other characters are still there. They're still doing their thing, regardless of what you have to say about it.
yeah, I think Amber, the Amber diceless game is another one of those systems that's like it's you can't remove it from the setting. Like I can't even imagine using that rule system for a homebrew game and trying to make it compelling. Like no way. Like it's so well put together for Amber that it seems it seems impossible to make
Mm,
that fly to
You
me
know,
anyway.
I've heard a lot of people say that it does work with a different setting, and
Boggles my
obviously
mind.
I'll just have to take their word
I
for it on that
I
because
think it comes down to tone, like you said. Like if you're going for a similar tone as an Amber game, a
sure.
similar system I think could work very well. But I don't think a system like Amber would work good for a adventure game or
Right.
horror game or something like that.
Yeah, Ember has a very unique tone, like empowered characters, potential PC conflict, um, a a focus on like interaction between PCs and NPCs and etc. Like Ed mentioned, the setting is sort of miscellaneous and sort of takes a backseat to the characters being
Sure.
the only things that are real. It's like that's it's definitely a game that only functions for a very limited scope of different game styles.
Yeah.
well,
Well,
Amber killed it.
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
God, Amber kills everything, man. We
It
have perfectly
does.
good conversation, and then Amber comes in, and then it's nothing.
I literally have nothing to add to Amber.
You have the books, don't you? I thought.
Yeah, but I haven't read them. So, and that's the
Bum.
thing is, here's how integrated Amber is that the only way that I would ever be able to play is if I read those books.
It's
You
kind of
know?
like the Star Wars game, I think,
Yep.
in that
Yeah.
effect. Except
Except
it's not 3 really good movies followed by 3 totally awesome movies that they made later.
I didn't think.
maybe better movies.
I want to go backwards for a second because I don't think it ever really got answered for Jeff about is Eclipse Phase too complex almost because and the reason I wanted to mention this is because you guys introduced me to Mage of the Awakening, and there's a lot of outside of the box thinking in order to make Mage work for you as well. And since I had never played it at all, I had to like really try to read up. And then when we started, like there was like players using terminology and doing things that are pretty normal for mages, and I'm like still trying to figure out what the hell they're talking about, So I was always like trying to research things while we are playing just to keep up. But it was almost okay because the concept behind Mage of the Awakening is that you kind of wake up with this, and you might not know exactly how to use all your powers or what the hell everything is like how it's structured or whatever. But in Eclipse Phase, it's more or less assumed that you know everything that's going on, unless, of course, I forget what the name of them, the Lost or whatever. Unless you're a Lost, you more or less are assumed
Which
to
case you
know
can't
exactly
define
how
reality in the
society
first place.
operates, and there is nothing strange about it. So you have to just start running with it immediately. So it does kind of pose a question as
Yeah,
to
it's a
whether or
little bit
not.
more intimidating on that.
Lost? What is that? No, my thought is that there has to be at least a little bit of player buy-in into that, but at the same time, the GM can't be expecting a person to think of something that's morally ambiguous and to have to deal with if you don't create your own proper setting for it to begin with. Like I can't throw um, conflicts at Jeff if they're just gonna bounce off him. And if I
He may not even
know that they're
realize the
gonna, yeah,
gravity of whatever situation you're throwing at
yeah.
him.
The GM, I think the GM is gonna has to be really careful at what they're throwing at their players and what their players are willing or capable of handling, especially at the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
Sure, and I think
When you guys played, oh, go ahead, Ed.
I was just going to say, with setting, as with just about everything related to RPGs, buy-in really is a big deal. Like if there's something about the setting that the players don't like or aren't into, or is going to cause a conflict, it's really going to harm the ability of that game to go anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if you're a Jedi and you really just want to like kill mercenaries and you don't have anything to do, if you don't want to have anything to do with the Sith, and the whole game is about the Sith.
So like we
Then you
we
can
were
become one.
discussing our
There you
character
go.
group for Eclipse Phase, and it was just like we just kind of came upon like what do we want these characters to do with basically any options, well, every option. We were like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't know, what are these?
Yeah, that was a
people
big question.
up
Like that's
to?
a difficult question.
We want them to transport stuff. What good is that? Oh,
Why?
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, we were all kind of on the wrong foot, I think, when we made our first Eclipse Phase characters because our party
Well, that
was
was
not
mostly
very
a
well
test
rounded.
game in the first place.
It was, but well, what I was going to ask is, was you guys first? And I'm not sure if all of you played together for your first Mage game or if most of you did, but were were you guys already well aware of the setting, or was the group kind of baby stepping it like we're probably going to do with Eclipse Phase until we understand more about what's going
Oh
on?
boy.
Neither.
When I was first introduced to Mage, it was not the Awakening, it was Mage the Ascension. And someone, my good friend Otto, who may or may not be listening to this, he told me, him and my other friend Matt told me that I could play a guy who could do anything he wanted with magic, and there were, sort of told me the basics of what a character was capable of, and then that was that. And then during the game, I got to learn what the technocracy was, which I'm still a little wishy-washy on. But overall, like, I was basically like picked up as like a very small baby in this setting, thrown into a 10-foot deep pool, and then the adults left the room, and then I learned to hate swimming.
Yeah.
So I decided that I didn't like Mage of the Ascension, which is more or less. I still don't really like it that much, but that could just be tainted by my
Did it at
original
least
view of
prepare
it.
you? Did it at least prepare you for Mage of the Awakening?
Absolutely not.
There's no way. What was going on back then is that we had some people who kind of understood the game a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and say none of us at that age fully understood a game like Mage of the Ascension. Even Ed and
I am willing
Otto,
now
who
to
probably
admit that
knew
I've
the
never
most.
really played a Mage the Ascension game.
Yeah, but it's like
not the right
whole,
way.
Like we've had people who would like try to run games that were like taking place on Earth, and we were all just like screwing around with magic and having a good time. It was fun. Meanwhile, I was trying to use any system I could find to run the kind of game I wanted to run, and none of them really worked that well for it. And it was just all kind of, I don't know. It was a
Yeah.
big mess, but we had a good time.
I would say
Yeah.
Ascension has the setting and gameplay of Ascension have the same barriers to entry as Awakening, only more so. It's like a lot of complaints come up about Awakening basically having a list of spells printed in the book, whereas I was really excited to see that when I first was acquainted with Awakening because basically Mage of the Ascension has a little essay about what each of the levels of the spheres of magic do, and you
Spheres.
read it and you understand, and then it gives you like 1 to 2 examples for each level, and then that's it. and then the rest of it you have to make up.
And then it's like
And-
player GM discretion as to
Well,
if you're
yeah,
actually
it's-
powerful
it's-
enough to do something.
It sure is.
extremely freeform, and then in other ways it's very granular. So, yeah, I would say that it's.
Oh, and then they'll
it's-
throw these things at you where they'll say, "Oh, but by the way, you absolutely can't do this unless you have like 2 in this other ability." And you're like, "How did you know that? How would you ever know that?" Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky,
It is a slippery slope.
but
It's a trickery slope, yeah.
but I tell you, it still has a certain amount of gravity for me. I wish that I had played it properly back then. Like, I wish I had known what the game was supposed to be about, so that it would color my experiences with the new Mage now.
Are you saying that you don't feel like you guys did it justice
No, I mean,
anyways?
I feel like we
I-
used the system, we used and abused the system, but I don't think I ever actually played a game that was in the Mage setting, played or ran. I ran one Technocracy game, which our dear friend Fred shot off the rails with a missile, and it never recovered at all, even slightly.
Oh, he stopped
And-
one of my games with a pipe bomb.
That was like the only game I can think of that I tried to run in the actual like setting mentality of Mage. The rest of the time it was just like, this is a way to port Magic people into a D10 based system. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the freeform magic thing was very cool, but the setting
it
was
still is
completely
cool.
meaningless to me. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool in either one.
Yeah.
In Awakening, the more I play it, the more I see the list of spells as as guidelines,
Examples, yeah.
examples, and I have a lot more creative ideas for it.
I really like it when a book tells me that an aspect of the setting is unknowable. I think that's cool, but when I read a book and think that the rules and mechanics are unknowable, that just is really difficult for me to
How you
stomach.
feel about the spheres? Yeah. Great. Yeah, and then I don't know, just in general, the New World of Darkness, the way they've presented things, I think, is more compelling to me.
Yeah.
The old vampire just did not
Say it is
do anything for me at all.
There is a reason why it is sort of the setting of choice, at least in terms of modern-ish games for us of late.
Yeah.
It's really compelling. I'm really into what they're doing with the new one. I wish I understood the old one better, but nothing to do for that now.
Nope. You can keep reading it, and we'll keep mocking you for it.
No, you won't. You'll be mocking me when I make you play.
Yeah, I'll play it because you'll tell me to. But
Yeah, you will do anything I say because you're impressionable.
yeah, it happened once with
In
Burning
my van,
Wheel.
I have
play it.
puppy.
Burning Wheel was fun.
Burning Wheel was
Yeah.
fun, but I only did it because Ed told me to.
Hmm.
Well, I
Name a
think
Shadowrun.
I think that might be a good transition
Yeah.
to a podcast some other day about games we want to play or something like that. But we should probably wrap it up today pretty
Mm.
soon, eh?
We should.
I go
You
with
know
Okay.
what we should do? We should. Well, I'll come up
Wrap
with
it
that
up.
later.
Awesome.
I'll tell you guys about it later, and it'll be a secret to everyone
Alright.
listening.
Alrighty.
So aside from super secret stuff, that was our topic on discussion. Find us at houserule.com. We tweet the tweets at houserule. Send us an email at houserule.podcast@gmail.com. I promise I'll check it every day and respond to you immediately, and we'll read it on the air.
Yay.
He's not going to do it for a year, so don't buy it.
No, buy it, please. Oh, weak. You've ruined it, Richard.
Even if it's like really personal questions, I'll like super stalk these guys and try to find answers, and then
He will. We live with him, except for Ed and Richard, and he,
Hey, I'm an open book.
he's really
so-
tenacious.
All right. So anyway, thanks for listening, guys, and we will catch y'all later.
Goodbye.
Later.
Good night.
Bye.